Welcome to the Inside Scoop, your one-stop shop for cracking the leadership code. Have you ever wondered what those conversations are like in the boardroom? Curious about the secret sauce successful executives possess? On the Inside Scoop podcast, we sit down with successful executives, getting their unique perspective on what it takes to be a good leader. They'll share their hard-won wisdom, the crucial competencies needed to thrive as a leader, and the unexpected lessons learned along the way. Here, we unlock the secrets of the executive suite. We get the inside track directly from the leaders themselves. In each episode, we'll dissect the essential skills needed to go from manager to leader, offering a leader's perspective on the challenges, triumphs, and unexpected wisdom they've acquired. The Inside Scoop, leadership lessons, served fresh.
For another episode of the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Eduardo Bryant. Today, we're going to be talking about setting others up for success. Our guest is going through a program. It's fascinating. You're going to want to hear his story. This program is helping not only to set you up for success on your job, but life in general. So as we go through it, if you find things that you can identify and associate with, we encourage you to subscribe to the channel and become part of our viewership. Now, this podcast, it's available wherever you get your podcast. Without any further ado, I'd like to bring on board none other than Mr. Ryan Joswick. He is the Senior VP of Operations. Let me get it right. Revenue Operations for Heartland. Make sure I give him his proper adieu there. And so let's bring him in. Ryan, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing outstanding. And it's a pleasure to be here and have this conversation with you. So thanks for the invite.
Well, I appreciate that. I think the real blessing and benefit here is going to be to the listening audience because your story is fascinating. And I think people are really going to enjoy listening to it. I always like to start off with this. Certainly being in a senior VP role, you undoubtedly are doing things to keep your skills sharp and to stay on top of your game. So let me ask, what are you reading right now?
I'm reading a lot of books. So I consume a lot. I actually listen to books, probably more. I'm more of an audible person. I know some people love that. Some people hate that. For me, I've learned that I can digest a lot of material when I'm working out and doing exercises and snowboarding and traveling and things like that. And so recently I'm reading a book, went through and reread it called From Strength to Strength. And an author named Arthur C. Brooks wrote it, who's a Harvard professor. And he studies the happiness, what makes people happy, what makes people unhappy. He recently wrote a book with Oprah, and he wrote a book From Strength to Strength. It's a fascinating book around fulfillment and what you want in a life. So.
I like that. Okay, well, we're going to get into some of that because from strength to strength, I have to write that one down and check that one out. That's good. So your path, your career path, where you are today, where you sit today, I'm sure that was not a linear line straight there. I'm sure that there was some curves and some bends and some meandering, if you will. Share with us, how did you get to where you are right now?
Yeah, I'll start back in college because it's kind of a fun story of I was in a marketing class and a gentleman was talking about a trip, an incredible trip that he just went on to Puerto Vallarta and how much fun they had. And I kept asking him about the trip and he kept blowing me off. And finally, I think something went in his brain of like, oh my gosh, I could probably recruit Ryan. So he's like, oh, let me tell you all about the trip. This was, weeks later. And it was a trip that he won by selling books door to door. And it was through a company called Southwestern. So he got me interested, got me excited about it. I committed to do it. I went and told people I was going to go do it. And they said, don't do it. That's a hard job. You don't want to do that. And I was like, well, I already committed. I'm going. And so at the time I was living in Washington State, going to Western Washington University. And we traveled across the country to Nashville, Tennessee for a Southwestern Advantage and went to sales school there. And then we went to New Jersey. And in New Jersey, for a week, we knocked on people's doors and not selling books, but asking them if we could live in their house because we had no place to live. So the idea was to find a host family that would bring you in, host you, so you could go and sell books 6 days a week. And then on the seventh day, celebrate Sabbath, and practice your skills to get better for the coming Monday. And so I did that, and I did really, really well at it. I didn't have a car, I had 3 different bicycles over the summer, but I sold a lot of books and ended up ranking extremely high. Out of the 3,000 people, I think I was ranked number 5. And the manager who hired me from when I graduated college sold books for the same company 5 years prior. So I did that my junior year. My senior year, I went to college, finished up, got my degree in business management, and then was interviewing with a bunch of different companies. And Cintas had a career fair, and the recruiter came and spoke with me, and she loved my book selling experience door to door. Because if anyone listening has ever done any type of sales and was door to door sales in residential, you know it's hardcore. Like it's just tough. The level of rejection, the discipline you have to have, the tenacity to keep going on, knocking on doors. And so I went to join Cintas as a sales rep. And Cintas is a business-to-business outsourcing company. They do facility service items, uniforms, first aid and safety. At the time, they also did shredding before they sold that business. And I was with them for 12 years. I was a quota-carrying sales rep, and then moved into becoming sales manager, not knowing what I'm doing, trying to manage and hire and recruit, and made a lot of mistakes along the way. But really, that's probably the first time I really said, wow, I love leading people. I love inspiring greatness in people, especially salespeople that are a little quirky and they like to have fun and like to compete. And I loved going out in the field and coaching and training and bringing the best out of people. Then I moved into a director role overseeing part of the US and Canada. And that was a big adjustment because I was traveling probably 3 weeks a month, which because you do a lot of traveling. It's just a different way of life. And then moved into a VP or a training and development role, director of training and development. So I was running workshops, doing facilitation, then moved into a VP of sales role. And then I was headhunted out by a company called Clare Perkins, which is a venture capital firm. And they were investing in a company in the Bay Area that they wanted me to come and run sales for and build out systems and processes and cadences. So I moved my family to the Bay Area. And that was quite a unique experience, and learned a ton about, going from a large corporate enterprise environment to a small startup under 50 employees. It was like, grab your duct tape, grab your billing wire, like, let's try to find solutions and get payroll out on Friday. And it was just a really cool learning experience. And then from there, I moved back up to Washington, did a little bit of consulting work, and wanted to find an organization that fit my values, fit who I was. And I had a friend who was running a business teaching people how to get jobs. And now he was probably working with the wrong pool of people because they didn't have jobs, so they couldn't pay for his service. But his concept and material was brilliant. He would teach you about application tracking systems. He would teach you about behavioral-based interviewing. But he had this concept around get really clear on the values of the company that you want to work for. Like thinking about what you want and what you don't want. And then I listed out, I want to work with quality people, smart people, disruptive technology, innovative, incredible income potential. And then, they would encourage you to go and look for companies that would match up to those values, right? So you can do LinkedIn searches, internet searches, and you try to say, okay, what companies match these values? And so I created a list of 42 different companies that I thought would match that. And then you'd go and you'd outline who the C-suite was, the board members were, people that were at a high level in the organization, so that you could get introduced into these companies. And so I was meeting with people in my network, met with one of my mentors who has been very successful in running an international consulting company. And he looked at my list of attributes, looked at values, and looked at my 42 companies. And he said, you should talk with Tony at Heartland. And I was like, well, who's Tony and what's Heartland? They weren't even on my list. But because I got clear on what my values were and what I wanted in a company, he said, oh, you should talk to this person, which wasn't even in my awareness. And so I started dialogue with the company that I'm with, is Cintas or Heartland, and spent 8 months in dialogue. And then I was tasked to come in and build net new channels for the organization, an inside sales team, a billing solution channel, and have spent a decade there running predominantly outside sales, and then most recently revenue operations the last 2.5 years. And it's been just an incredible journey. So I gave you a lot there, but that's kind of the progression that I've had over the last 25 years.
You know, it is what it is. Your career path, how you've gotten there. You started all the way back in college. So give your college a shout out. What college did you go to?
I went to Western Washington University up in Bellingham, Washington. So just north of Seattle, Washington.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when you were knocking on doors trying to find people that would let you stay there so that you could go out and sell your books, they have a term for that now. It's called couch surfing. It's big overseas. It's really big. In fact, I was in Paris and I was working internationally, and I was there for almost a month doing one of my assignments. And I learned about this whole thing. I knew about couch surfing, but really I learned how big it was over there and how there were so many people that literally would just pack their bags, jump on a plane, go somewhere, and then all these places where they could stay, and they call it couch surfing. And you literally sleep on someone's couch in their living room while you do your everyday whatever, hiking or sightseeing, or if you have a job, you're working and something like that. And so you were couch surfing before you knew of couch surfing.
That's it. And before Airbnb and some of the other sites, I remember because it was the summer of 99. So the internet was just getting popular. So people would often say, well, have you looked in the newspaper? Have you looked for people renting rooms? And we'd have to say, well, we're college kids. We don't have really money to pay for that. We're looking for a host family. And usually they would just shut the door and be like, I'm not going to let you, you're a crazy person. I'm not going to let you in my house. But we found the coolest family, the Lysenkos, that took us in. And they were just an incredible family of love and care and respect. That after you knock on doors for 5 days and you get the door slammed on you, and then you find a loving family like that is willing to take you in. And they did family fun days on Sundays. Every Sunday they do games and barbecues, and man, it's just here I am talking about 25 years later, and it was just an amazing experience. And it really laid the groundwork from a discipline standpoint, from a work ethic standpoint, because it's a 1099 role. You're out on your own. If you sell something, you make money. If you don't make no money. So, it's truly a feast or famine type of environment. And they've adjusted their recruiting practices where I think they help people find homes now before they actually go to the area. But 25 years ago, they didn't. It was it's on.
It's feast or famine, man. You find it on your own, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it really was.
And you talked about how you had a discipline in another place. You took a marketing class, and here you were, and someone recommended that you go talk to a different company just because of what you were trying to do and what you brought to the table, and someone else recognized that. I can imagine most of us probably are not in the job that we thought we would be in, or perhaps not in what we studied in college. I mean, how many of us have a degree in one thing and yet we're doing something totally different?
Yeah.
A lot of times it's because someone saw something in us, they recognized the skill set. And that's what management is about, being able to recognize in others skills, and sometimes skills that they don't even know that they have. And then as managers, we kind of push them and say, you should do this, you should try this. And then before you know it, they're in a whole new facet of something that they hadn't thought about doing, but yet it works out real well because of that vision of the leader or the manager to see something. Do you know who the person was that recommended that you go do that? And are you in touch with them?
I have not spoken with them in a while.
Okay.
I do know them. They've made some hard life choices. Have struggled, I would say, in life. But I'm forever thankful for that engagement and conversation within a marketing class, because I wouldn't have probably not found Southwest. Maybe I would have, but maybe not have. And, like Steve Jobs says, when you're looking back, you can connect the dots. It's hard to do it when you're looking forward. And I can look back now and I look at this ripple effect that happened, that I met him, Brady, and he engaged and got me recruited in, and I went and sold books and committed not to quitting, even though I wanted to quit so bad because it was really, really hard. And 2 hours in, the cops came with a paddy wagon and they took me down to the courthouse because I didn't have permits. I was like, permits? What? Oh yeah, you can't knock on doors without permits. So But I learned a lot in that process that later in life helped me. And, to your point, I think about that. I've got 3 daughters, and one of them's like, why do I have to do this math? And I said, well, yes, I have a calculator. You have a calculator in the future. It may not even need the calculator with AI, but the skill set you develop in doing the math in school is how do you take jumbled information and make sense of it? It is critical thinking. And I said, those are the skills that are going to be applicable in other areas of your life when you get older. And they're like, okay, well, maybe that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't. They kind of roll their eyes and walk off. But I think to your point, just because someone is studying something or anyone listening to this podcast, they may be doing a job and they're kind of like maybe not completely fulfilled. And just because they have a degree in one thing and they chose to do that degree in that thing, and now they're kind of like, I'm just unfulfilled. This isn't what I want. It doesn't mean they can't go do something else, right? If they have communication skills, they have problem-solving skills, emotional intelligence skills, selling skills, like you name it, those are applicable in different types of roles and different types of industries.
You see, I think you're talking about an area that we just don't talk a lot about. We know the concept, but I'm not sure that companies really do it that well, and that is transferable skills. We say, yeah, if a person has transferable skills, you should A, interview them, and B, even hire many of them because of those transferable skills. But think about it. How often do we hire people, even though the transferable skills are there, we hire people that seem to be either in the same industry we're in, they've got a ton of experience, and we seem to put more weight on the familiarity of that experience based against what they'll be doing here with us, versus saying, wait a minute, this guy's a teacher. Now, absolutely nothing to do with what we do here. But as a teacher, he's demonstrating the core competencies that are needed to be successful here. It's just not the same. We called it in school the widget. I'm dating myself. We would look at those things and say, wow, that's what we need. So I think you're hitting on something there, Ryan, when you talk about, well, you may not have gone to school for this, your degree is not in this, but look at how you've developed a skill set that is applicable in a multifaceted of areas.
Yeah. What comes to my mind is this concept around talent, skills, knowledge. Talent is that, innate ability that you have. And some would argue, but I don't think you can put that in someone. Like they have it. And it's usually developed in the first 5 to 7 years of their life. Now you can bring it out of people. And I think to your earlier point, that's what good leaders do, is they identify a talent in someone. And sometimes that own individual doesn't even realize they have that talent, right? It could be how they approach people. It could be their work ethic. It could be their tenacity. It could be you fill in the blank. And then you have the skills, and those are sequential steps. And then you have the knowledge, which is knowledge. And you can teach people the skills and the knowledge. So if they can find something, a profession, something that plays to their talent, they can learn the skills and knowledge, especially nowadays with the internet and like online learning and like the consumption of information from a knowledge standpoint, and mentors and executive coaches to help them learn the sequential steps. If they have the work ethic, the drive, the curiosity, the willing to learn, and you apply that on top of talent, man, the sky's the limit.
Wow. As you were talking, I was just thinking for a moment there, is that not one of the core concepts of leadership? So when we talk about setting others up for success, it's recognizing, I think, as a manager, recognizing in others the things that will make them great, not just beneficial for the company, but also for their lives. And so how do we set people up? How do we take on a role of leadership and responsibility and be actually charged with the responsibility of having a team, and yet making each person individually within that team the best that they can possibly be? Maybe giving them a level of responsibility as a team lead, or putting them in charge of a project, like a project manager, so that the skills that you recognize in them can then be forged so that it shines, and they then can grow in an area that they may have never thought about, and it's in them. So when we think about setting others up for success, let's dialogue that just a bit, because I'm sure that as managers, especially a young manager that's kind of new at it, I mean, you're at a senior VP level, but a new guy, or girl that's coming in, that person is going to have to grab that concept. And like you said, it's easier to look back and connect the dots than it is to look forward. Looking backwards with experience allows us to say, I would have done this different, or here's a good practice to do. What are some of those practices that maybe you can, or you have employed in people to say, I'm going to help you get to where you're trying to go, or help you get somewhere that I think is really catering to your skills?
Yeah. I think about when I first became a leader, and even some of the mistakes that I made is I would use one approach, and then I'd say, why aren't they reacting? It was from my vantage point. I was leading someone how I wanted to be managed, or how I would have been managed in the past. And it was a real eye opener to realize that people are different, right? Like that concept of situational leadership, right? And one time I was at a networking event and talking with a very successful individual, and he'd built multiple companies. And I said, hey, what's the best advice, the best leadership advice you've ever received? And he paused and he looked, and then he looked at me and says, meet them where they're at, but don't leave them there. And that was really pivotal for me, because I said, okay, I got to meet someone where they're at. And then how do I take them on this journey? And this journey being, where do they want to go? Right. And hopefully that aligns up with what the company goals are, or you got to have some conversations around making sure that there's alignment there. And then equipping them from a training standpoint, a skill standpoint, encouragement standpoint, because often people don't know what they don't know. So as a leader, you can speak into some of these ideas and these concepts, resources. You asked me about a book when we first started. Sometimes you have employees that you can give a very simple suggestion of a book, a video, something that they could watch, and then you see, do they take that? And do they come back the next week or the next interaction and say, hey, I read that book, or I watched that video, and that was really interesting. Or do they not even mention it, or I didn't really watch it? So I love working with people that take things and they run with it. And it doesn't mean they're really good at it. They might come back and say, I listened to it and I went and tried it and it didn't work. I got thrown out of the business. I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about it. Good job trying it. High five. Let's talk about what did you say? How'd you do it? Let's do some role plays on that if it's sales related. But if they're trying something new and then it doesn't work out, that's okay too. There's just as much value in finding what an employee likes versus what they don't like, or what works and what doesn't work. Too often, I think people are so fearful of trying something, or they try something and they don't get the right result right away, so they just give up. That's not life. When my kids were young and they were struggling in walking, I wasn't like, okay, if you don't walk in 5 minutes, you're done. We're giving up. You're not going to walk again. No, you keep encouraging them, and you got this, and they're waddling. It's no different when you're working with employees, depending on what level they're at in the organization. They're good, hardworking people. Give them the knowledge, give them the training, give them the skill, give them the encouragement. And hopefully that lines up with what they're passionate about, and they're going to take off.
I love that. I actually wrote it down while you were talking. Meet people where they're at, but don't leave them there.
Yeah.
That's really good. I wrote that down. So, and that's character building, isn't it? And the way you related it to your family, or a family in general, to say that you don't just give up on people. You're building their character and giving them the ability to know that success is coming and that they can do it. And I love the way you talked about not quitting. Your story about selling books, and then I think I heard you say the cops showed up and threw you in a paddy wagon and took you down because you didn't have a permit.
I didn't have a permit. Yeah.
But you persevered. Looks like you went right back out once it got it all cleared all up.
Yeah. What's interesting is that, and that was in South Orange, New Jersey. And, well, wait a minute. I got pulled over in Maplewood, New Jersey. I sold in I sold in Maplewood, New Jersey, and then South Orange. South Orange had a much longer of a process to be able to get permits. But in Maplewood, New Jersey, I was literally able to go into the courthouse, pay the whatever amount it was, and get a permit on the spot. Where with South Orange, that one was more of a 4-week process at the time, where you had to fill out an application, you had to submit stuff. I mean, now you probably got to do a lot more even for that, because some of these counties would put 6 to 12 week timeline to get a permit, and they know that people aren't going to wait for that. So basically they're bypassing, people selling in their counties. But yeah, and it's kind of a funny story, and I don't know if we'll get into it now, but you learn in sales, you learn these sales scripts, what to say. When they say this is what you say, at the door, and this is how you overcome the objection. So we spend all this time memorizing it and practicing it. But then when it comes time to actually perform, like the gun goes off, it's like, here we go. You get the adrenaline going, the endorphins going. Well, I messed up the speech. I messed up the talk tracks. And what happened was, normally you would say, hey, now do you have kids that are, in high school or a little bit younger? They thought I was basically someone going through the neighborhood snagging little kids, because what I said came out the wrong way around. Okay, so you got the little kids, and they were like, "Oh my God, this guy's a creepo!" Like they called the cops, and so literally the cops came, and I'm sitting on a curb, and they're like, "Well, you're freaking people out." And I'm like, "Well, how am I? I'm just selling books." And they're like, "Well, what are you saying?" And I told them, and they're like, "Okay, well, that's not what they heard." And I'm like, "Well, I'm nervous, and this is my very first time out. We spent a week knocking on doors asking if we live in people's houses, but not so much selling books." And so, but the learning curve, right? I mean, a lot of people, we would go to these meetings, and every week people would quit. You would see 10 people drop off, 20 people drop off, 30 people drop off, like a high amount of attrition. But if you stuck it out and you kept trying and just used the first 2 weeks of like, okay, I'm gonna focus on just being diligent and practice over and over and over, and I'm gonna listen and I'm gonna learn. And it's just about, how do you learn from what's working and how do you learn from what's not working? And if you do that enough time, most people can outlast, and through repetition, at least me, I was like, okay, I'm getting a hang of this. Like I can knock on 100 doors and get in a house now, where before it might have taken 500 doors. And then you get down to 50 doors and 20 doors. And that was in B2C, dealing with the consumer. And now the last 20 years, I've dealt large sales teams that's B2B. How do you get in front of businesses and help them solve problems? How do you identify what their business objectives are and the buying motives and overcoming objections and positioning true value add? And there's an activity component to it. There's a discipline component to it. There's communication component to it. Like a lot of the fundamentals I learned back in college still apply now. Different industry, different product, obviously a little bit more advanced sale, but the core is still there.
It is. Those things that you were just talking about are core principles in selling that I don't think ever go away. You talked about handling the objections and all of that. And salespeople need to know that they've got to keep going. It's not going to be an overnight success. We all know that. But the ability to just continue knowing that adversity or rejection is going to come, but eventually it gets easier. And as it gets easier, you get better at it. And as you get better at it, then you become much more successful. And that's really what you want, is that level of success. So for a lot of us, we think that, if I'm good at this, it should just happen. Even though you're good at it, sometimes it doesn't happen right away. And I think part of that's what you talked about, is that's the communication. The old thing, what you say isn't what they hear. I heard you say that. That is so true. You can say one thing, and then, of course, your person will hear something totally different. And then all bets are off at that point. Hopefully the cops don't show up, but nonetheless,
they were actually really nice. And they actually thought it was pretty funny. I did not. I was terrified. I was like, oh man, I made a biggest mistake here. But they actually thought it was kind of humorous. So
yeah, I can only imagine, right?
Yeah.
I can only imagine that. So, and that's really truly helping people get better. So throughout your life, look at all the people that have had a hand in your level of success, not just job wise, but as a person and who you are. And I know that you have embarked upon a venture. I don't know if it's new, but it's a venture where you got a group of people and you guys get together and you have an opportunity and you guys go places and you teach and you learn, and it's called Halftime, I believe.
Yeah.
I'd love to learn more about that.
Yeah, it's been an incredible journey, and one that I wasn't actually fully expecting when I got into it. I chatted with one of my mentors and said, "Hey, I'm just not feeling fulfilled. Like there's a part of me that is defined successful, but I don't wake up passionate about what I do." And he said, "Hey, have you ever read the book Halftime?" And I was like, maybe a couple of years ago, someone recommended it. And he says, well, they have a whole institute around helping people discover what they want to do when they grow up. And he says, you should have a conversation with them. And so I engaged in dialogue with Rhonda at the Halftime Institute, and she's just incredible. And I was like, yeah, I can relate with this, like these emotions, these feelings, and I still feel young, but I'm halfway through my life. And so the concept is you stop halfway through your life and you take an inventory of the first half. You take a look at what are all the victories and achievements, and what are all the setbacks that I've had. And you do exercises where you look at every decade of your life, and you look at the highs and the lows and the memories that were created and the experiences, and maybe even some of the regrets and things like that. And then you do an inventory of what your values are and getting really, really clear on what are my core values? Like, what do I stand for? And then how well am I living those values? Like every day, how am I showing up and living, not just what I say, but what I do? Identifying your strengths. So going through and doing strength finders assessments, identifying your weaknesses. And again, looking at what you're doing on a given day. How does that line up with your values, your strengths, your weaknesses, creating mission statements. And so what for me, I went into it thinking, hey, I want to do something with a career like I don't feel fulfilled, has now made me step back and say, okay, the career is just one small slice of a much bigger pie, and the pie being my entire life. How am I doing with relationships? How am I doing with my spiritual? How am I doing with financially? How am I doing with my life goals? If I was to, get some terminal disease and I only had a month or a year left to live, am I living today out how I'd want to live? And you have to ask yourself really, really hard questions. And you go through exercises like you're at your 80th birthday, and who's there, and what are people saying about you? And so, for many years, I've created business strategic plans for different companies I've been at. Where are you going to spend resources? Where are you going to allocate? Where are you going to, how are you going to prioritize? But I've never actually stopped and created a personal strategic plan at the depth that I have here. Like at a very, very clear, intentional level of where do I want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and 20 years, and creating such a compelling vision around it, not worrying so much about the how, because the brain goes to that, the lizard brain's like, oh my God, how are you going to do that? You're not going to be able to do that. Like just thinking about, okay, if I could create any type of life I want, what would that look like? Where would I live? Who would I interact with? What would I do during a given day? What type of work would I do? What type of activities and things like that? And then, backing into the how, which comes later. And so this program, I've been about 6 months in. It's a 12-month program. We get together every 90 days. Last week, I was in Nashville, Tennessee with my cohort. There's 10 of us going through it, along with staff from the Halftime. And we're going to meet with people that had went through Halftime years ago, and that are now living out more fulfilled with their moving from success to significance, and living out their values and passions and strengths and so forth. And it was really, really neat. It was a really cool experience. We do weekly video calls, we do monthly webinars, and then have executive coaching that goes along with it. And really what it helps you do is it helps you through the emotional roller coaster of like, hey, I should be feeling this way. Like society says this is successful. But when you really peel back the onion, you say, but I do feel this way. And what is my internal GPS telling me about these feelings? And how do I want to course correct my life, my one and only life I have on earth? How do I want to course correct that to live the most fulfilling life I could ever imagine? And that's the process that I'm going through now. And it's been eye-opening. It's been challenging. It's been, it's forced me to face stuff that maybe I haven't faced for many years. But ultimately, when you look in the mirror, you're the only person you're lying to if you don't want to address that stuff. Like if you truly peel back the onion and be vulnerable, it's incredible where you can go, because then you start having like these conversations, and then you start talking with other people that open up about how they're feeling and what they're doing. And then that leads to another conversation, another book, another workshop. Like it's been an amazing last 6 months, more rich than I ever thought I was going to get going into this program.
Sounds like it's made quite a dramatic impact on your life.
Yeah, it really has. And it's caused me to pause and create more space in my calendar to think, pray, be fully present. We get so wrapped up in go, 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 go. But how, Andy Dillard says, how you live your days is how you live your life.
Mhm. It's like we're all on a hamster wheel, just going and going and going, and wake up every day, do the same thing. But
Yeah.
to find purpose, meaningful purpose for your life, I think that that is the true blessing,
Yeah.
because then you can enjoy as you go through. When they talk about the day a person is born and then the day that they pass away, everybody wants to talk about that dash in the middle. That is, what did you do? How did you live? What things were important to you? What contributions have you made to the world that benefit other people's lives? It sounds like you've really found a good purpose there. Now, was any of that present or recognized just throughout your leadership career, or is this something that you just recently stumbled upon?
Oh, good question. No, I would say at a certain level, it had been like I had a vision statement. I've had my core values identified. So in some of that stuff, I was already ahead of it. But I think, if I'm being completely vulnerable, looking at here are my values but here is my life, and looking at the incongruency between the two. And I think that was where I had to really step back and say, okay, how is the environment impacting who I am as an individual and how things are being done? And am I okay with that? Or, does a change need to happen? And then, if family is, at the top of my values, am I spending the time with the family? Right? Like values are how do you prioritize your life? So if you look at your calendar and you look at your checkbook, do those line up with what your values are? And I think we can say, oh, I value this, but do you really? Like, if you're truly being honest with yourself and looking in the mirror, is that what shows up in your life? And I think that was the part where I had to step back and go, how did I get that far off from what I know in my heart is true? And that's where it's just been absolutely liberating.
Sounds like you've made some course corrections along the way.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And it's a process, right? I mean, I haven't got it all figured out by any means. But I got a lot of really great, caring, loving people around me that are helping me through this process. And I'd rather do it now when I'm in my 40s and get laser clear on what I want to do when I'm in the end of my 50s and 60s, and have that roadmap and intentionality now, instead of continuing to sprint on the hamster wheel,
So
hoping that something changes.
when you think about managers who have an introspective look at life, which is what you're talking about, and being able to really value those core things that are essential to happiness, think about the employees that they lead. Because when we talk about management skills and we talk about all the programs that we go through to make us a better leader, it's wonderful, I believe, when we can embrace the things that make us first as individuals the best that we can be, looking at life through not just a prism, but kind of taking it kind of in a whole, for us to say, if I can do this for me, then that's going to make me a better leader to the people with whom I lead, or even just the organization in general. So I like the things that you're talking about, because that says whoever is in the downline, those are the people that are going to get your wisdom and your knowledge and the benefit of all the things that you've learned. And the character that you've built in you is something that you can now inspire in others. Because I can only imagine that if you're doing this for you, that you're developing a vision for other people, and maybe you're starting to get a sense of where they are, or what might be helpful, or where their skills are, or how they could do this better. Well, not so much better, but how they can improve in areas of their lives. I can only imagine that that's part of, or that's becoming, I should say, part of who you are.
Yeah, and I think that one, I've always enjoyed serving other people and helping other people. Like, I get a tremendous amount of satisfaction in helping people on that journey. And I think me going through this process it gives me another perspective. And you're exactly right. When, your Gallup organization does, studies every single year, every other year, where they poll millions of people. And when you look at actual engagement, right, of leaders, it trickles all the way down, right? John Maxwell talks about the law of the lid, right? So, if you are people are listening to this and you're not engaged, you've got to stop and say, what do I need to do personally to get engaged in what I'm doing? Because it impacts everything around you, whether you're in a leadership role with direct people reporting to you, or you work around people, right? You influence people, good or bad.
There's a tremendous influence that leaders have on other people. You've probably seen or heard or read, it says that your manager has a greater impact on your mental health than your therapist or your doctor.
Yep.
So the person you spend a lot of time with or the person you report to, that person is going to have, like you said, good or bad effect on who you are. So these types of things that you're talking about is certainly going to help you, I believe, to just be even better so that you can help people just become the best that they can possibly be.
That's the
You
goal.
talked about something a moment ago. I want to go back to it if I may. As you were talking, you were bringing in how you're making some course corrections and some things that you're doing in your life, and how this halftime program is helping you kind of look at and shape things. Can you share with us some of the maybe changes that you've made, some things that perhaps you do different or even look at different as a result of the training that you've now had in relatively short period of time, 6 months, but it can be pretty dramatic with a great impact on you? What are some of those things that you would say, you know what, this has affected me so much that here's something I'm doing?
Yeah, there's a couple. One is more space in the calendar, right? I used to book the day with 10 to 12 calls, meetings, 100 emails, and it's tough to be fully present and have time to think on that. And so when you have a little bit more time on the calendar, it makes a big difference. The other one would be, you can physically be present, but are you mentally present? So if you work a really, really challenging job or role or whatever, their profession is, and I talked about those values, are you giving as much to your family as you're giving to your job? Because if you show up at night and you're just mentally exhausted because you felt like you ran a marathon during the day, physically you're there, but mentally you're not. And again, if you look at the values like me and say, hey, my family's super important, how am I providing, not just providing financially for them, but mentally, spiritually, emotionally, like helping to develop the kids to be the best they can be? I have this short window of time until they're out of the house and they're on their own. They're making decisions on their own. And sometimes they're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. I'll probably make a lot of mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes. And so those would be a couple. The other one is probably even say my spiritual life, like getting really connected in what matters most. And that's been enlightening and almost freeing. Yeah. Those would probably be the three biggest adjustments that I'm 3 months into. The other one is, deciding I'm going to be doing something different from a career standpoint. Like, that's a big change too. Realizing that what's important to me and what I'm passionate, excited about, and my own values. Realizing that people change, companies change, and like it's all good. And it's a new season for me to do something different, and I'm excited about that.
You know what? I wish you all the best and success. I truly feel and believe that no matter what you do, you will be successful at it and certainly bring a lot of value to it. It's amazing. Those types of things that we've just discussed. I mean, really, that's the introspective that we want in our lives, the way that we view the world, and our optimistic outlook, and how we are as individuals, and where we want to be and how we want to get there, and just, development and self-help, and just trying to do things that not only make us a better person, but allow us to be around other people. And if there's something in us that can influence them in a positive manner, I mean, that's really the way to go. That's truly self-help 101. So I think those things are awesome. I mean, you have just enlightened me, and I'm sure you've enlightened our listening and viewing audience, because those things are things that I think that we should all be trying to get at. Companies send managers away for management training, but do they get this? or do they get more of the technical stuff of how to fill out expense reports and understanding all the compliance rules that they got to follow and obey as a leader? But it's this stuff, the in-depth things that says, how do I make myself a better human so that the people with whom I lead can also be benefited from that? So
Yeah. It never ends. Just because I'm out of college doesn't mean, for anyone listening and you're earlier in your career, the learning, as long as you're willing, the old proverb, the teacher appears when the student's ready. Like, whenever you're willing to learn and do that, like, man, the sky's the limit. And that's where I've really enjoyed our conversations and learning about your business and, what you do and going to organizations and training and developing and you got a big heart. I can tell you got good character. So you deal with a lot of organizations and training a lot of people, which is pretty neat.
Well, no, thank you for that. I certainly appreciate that. And, I think I've enjoyed this conversation so much because I'm standing in front of leaders all the time. And you can just kind of sense and get a flavor for the ones who have done some of the things that you've done in their life, and then those that are just charging ahead and they really don't care if they step on someone's head to get to the top or not. They're just going to get there and they just keep on going. So I appreciate that very much. Well, you know what, Ryan? This has been good, man. I have enjoyed this thoroughly. Yeah. Before we sign off, I'll give you an opportunity that if there's some more parts of wisdom that you want to impart, please do, as they say, share.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously we covered a lot of different topics, and depending on who's listening today, if we're not connected on LinkedIn, you can send me a note, ryanjoswick.com. I also have a website. You can send me a note there. But it's just been an honor, and I'm cheering for you. I'm cheering for you in your career and for your fulfillment. I think what I would end with, I think sometimes fear holds people back longer than it probably needs to. And I learned that early on, action cures fear. And if you're willing to take action, even if it's not the right action, but you course correct and you learn from it, your career can be extremely successful and fulfilled. And success is really by your definition. I know society has a certain definition of it, but ultimately, at the end, like you said, when you look at the tombstone and the start date and the end date and the dash in the middle, the listener, that's you define what that is going to be in your life. And I'm excited and I'm cheering for you. And if I could ever help you along the way, let me know.
Outstanding. Again, thank you so much for being our guest today. And thank you for listening to another episode of The Inside Scoop. We appreciate you being here. And as we always say, you have a great life, so live it to its fullest. And once again, if you heard something and something resonated with you, we encourage you to subscribe and become part of our viewing audience. For this episode of The Inside Scoop, we thank you. We certainly thank Ryan. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to having you with us on another episode. Bye for now.
For more exclusive leadership insights, be sure to subscribe to The Inside Scoop on YouTube and Spotify. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that share button and spread the word. See you next time on The Inside Scoop.